What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another 2023-2024 NBA team look ahead. We are on to the Los Angeles Clippers, and I am super excited and appreciative to be joined by, making his first appearance on the podcast, Justin Russo. Follow him on Twitter at FlyByNight. That's at FLYBYKNITE. He covers the Clippers and the NBA at large over at Substack. Go to justinrusso.substack.com. The link to it will be in the podcast and YouTube description as well. His work is incredibly detailed. So go over there, support him. Like I said, links in the podcast and YouTube description. Justin, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. It's a Wednesday early afternoon, so I'm just kind of enjoying my time over here just before the season begins. Clippers have a game on Thursday, and then they're off for almost a week, so that's very nice. I'm enjoying the time off that they've given throughout this camp. So they went to Hawaii for a week, which was cool. Then they came back and they had about a week off, and that was nice. So it's a nice slow ramp up to the season rather than just being thrown right into everything.
I've said this a bunch to people, but that first Tuesday of the NBA season or the Wednesday where there's like the 10 or 11 games, I have like an existential crisis of how did I cover all of this last year? I can't intake all of this basketball and content. So I never look forward to opening night is great. I never look forward to the night following it.
Yeah, the night after is always like hectic. There's like too much happening, and you feel like you're not going to get your money's worth for your league pass subscription. And
Yeah.
then like somehow it calms down throughout the season.
Yeah, or you just get the hang of being in complete and utter chaos is probably what happens. Speaking of complete and utter chaos, I will eventually have to get to the James Harden stuff. As we're recording this, I'm just hoping that the podcast doesn't become dated because something outlandish happens with him. I actually wanted to ask you about last season. I know there was a bunch of stuff going on, but what was kind of the single biggest to you or most important driving factor behind how it transpired? Was it really just the lack of availability from Kawhi and PG? Did that spawn some of the weird rotation stubbornness from Ty Lue at points? Did it harm the defense? Like, did it screw up how they were going to try and play with pacing? It's just there was so much going on. I'm just wondering if one thing is sticking with you more than anything else. And if it's just the injuries, I totally get it.
So they've talked this camp that like the injuries were the big thing, is what they've been saying. Like they just once the injuries happened, it was such a stop and start season that they weren't able to fully get comfortable as a unit, and it kind of just bled into their play on the court. Anytime you watched them last year, you knew they weren't that good because they just looked like a jumbled mess for the majority of the year. They'll say injuries. There was probably other stuff that was at play, but it was probably a trickle down effect from the injuries where guys had to move into roles that they, not that they weren't comfortable with, but that they were being asked a lot of. For instance, going into last year, Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris had been asked a lot of themselves the year prior when Kawhi was out for the whole year. PG missed, I believe, 51 games that year. And Reggie and Marcus kind of dragged the Clippers to a 42-40 season, which was actually crazy. Like in retrospect, that was a remarkable year for the team. And last year, going into the year, it was almost like, all right, Kawhi and PG are back. Everyone can kind of take a step back, kind of, get comfortable with their role again. And then that didn't happen because Kawhi then had to miss about a month early on due to the knee issue. And then PG missed time due to injuries. But when Kawhi came back from the initial knee thing, uh, he rolled his ankle after like 4 games, and he had to miss another 6 games. So it was like this constant, we have one guy and then we don't have the other. And then when we get both of them, someone else gets hurt. And it was just this endless cycle of injuries and no camaraderie. Um, the chemistry was always just slightly off, and you could see it in their play. They were not a fast-paced team. They were very slow. All year, Ty talked about them having to play quicker, and they never did until they got rust, and they started playing a little bit quicker. But basically, long story short, like injuries affected them a great deal, but I think it's a disservice to just say the injuries were what did it. Like they did it themselves. They did it themselves. There were a lot of mistakes that they made along the way, roster construction wise. They went into the year. They only had one center. Ivica Zubac was their only center. They had no backup center.
Mhm.
And then they didn't play Robert Covington as much as they probably should have. To which Ty said at media day, I should have played Rocco a lot more. They're a veteran team, and when veteran teams get tired, you can kind of see their defense slip, which is what happened. The first about 15, 20 games of the year, their defense was really good, and their offense was bad.
Mhm.
And then, like, it really flipped after that. Like, their offense became really good, and their defense was disastrous. And I kind of just think, like, the long season got them. Um, but what's weird is, like, Kawhi was incredible for the last, like, half of the season.
Yeah.
And it kind of glossed over a lot of like what ailed them. And the reason people picked them to at least give Phoenix some level of a series was simply just because of Kawhi, which still tells you how good he is. But injuries were a big factor, but it wasn't the only factor for them. There was a lot of other stuff at play.
Why is this team is synonymous with the load management or injured player discussion? Why does it feel like for every other player or most other players that their absences, the way that their injuries are treated are framed as this is the team's decision, but when it's Kawhi and even PG to some extent, it's something about these two rather than is there something to that? Is there something happening behind the scenes with practices or like these aren't neither of them has just struck me as players who don't want to play basketball. And so I've just been curious if you view there's a primary reason why the discussion unfolds the way it does around them.
So it's a weird situation because they have input. To say that they don't have input would be mistaken. Every star has input into the medical side of things. But what's really interesting is every time you hear the team talk about it, it's training staff and medical decision.
Hmm.
And then the stars just have to go along with it. There was a point last season that I won't say the player, but during the locker room prior to a game, that player who had missed several games due to injury had we were in the locker room, the media was. This player said, I'm ready to play. Got asked, well, are you playing tonight? No, medical just won't clear me, but I'm ready to play. They just won't clear me. And so there is like a disconnect a little bit,
Mhm.
I think, for perception, which is the players don't want to play, but they do. It's medical who is telling them, hey, you can't play today. And they will go to the higher ups and tell them, like, they're redlining, they're in the red, you need to tone it back, stuff like that. Do I think it's gone too far at times? Yeah, I do. I think there's been times where they should have played and they just didn't. And the players wanted to play,
Mhm.
but medical wouldn't let them play. So I think, but with PG and Kawhi, I do think there's just a perception, Kawhi especially, where because of his time in San Antonio and how that ended, and his time in Toronto, where it was perceived that he just wasn't going to play back to backs, which
Mhm.
was a medical decision, and that carried over to the Clippers somewhat. Last season, he didn't play back to backs until like the last month of the season. Then he started playing them, but that was always the plan. That was the plan with him all last season was to ramp him up to play back to backs at the end of the season. But I kind of just think it's well, Kawhi plays when he wants to play. Like that's the perception on
Yeah.
the outside. But on the inside, this is a very regimented, detailed guy who loves basketball. I've had conversations with him about basketball. He loves to play. He wants to play. No one likes sitting out being injured. It's not a fun thing. And I just think the perception is, well, he just doesn't want to play. Like he got his money and he's home. It's funny because I think if either guy wasn't playing in LA, I think if they were somewhere else and it wasn't home, I think the perception would be different.
And it's also like Kawhi has the quad tendinopathy. Like that's
Right.
a real thing. And so I was
Yes.
actually going to ask you how both these guys looked in training camp preseason. It feels like Kawhi had the meniscus procedure and then it seems like he's come back without any real limitations. Do you expect there to be is there no ramp up process here? Do you expect them to be playing back to backs coming out the gate? Like, what should we really look for from them?
As far as back to backs, I'm uncertain. Um, it, if he didn't have the meniscus thing, I think he'd play back to backs.
Mm.
But they have so many back to backs this year. They have 15 back to backs. It's tied for the most in the league. They travel more than any other team this year. I think residual or positive residual had it as 50,000 miles, which I believe is 5 or 6,000 miles more than any other team. That's a lot of miles, and they're going to have to manage guys, whether or not people like it. They're going to have to manage guys. That's a lot of mileage. It's a lot of travel. It's a lot of back to backs. I think they have the most, or they're tied for the most instances of 3 and 4 nights.
Okay.
So, like, I think Golden State's the other team that's tied with them. So, like, there's gonna be times where they have to rest guys, and people are gonna hate it, but it is what it is. And that's just the way it's gonna have to go. But for Kawhi and PG, they look good. Everything looks on track. They said, a week before training camp opened that Kawhi's good. There's no ramp up. Like, he's good. He's 100%. He's ready to go, and he's shown that. 3 preseason games. He and PG played the first half of every preseason game. They've spent 51 minutes on the floor together so far in 3 games. Ty's talked about that during the regular season. They're going to stagger them, which is what they did a couple years ago. Or Ty's first year with the team, they staggered them like all the time. One was always on the floor.
Hmm.
They look good. PG looked great yesterday. I think he had 23, obviously in the first half. But it's a season long process to where I don't think I can say right now Kawhi is for sure not playing back to backs or for sure will play back to backs. I think this is just what I hypothesize. I think he'll start out sitting back to backs and then gradually move into playing both of them. The more he plays, probably the better in terms of health.
Hmm.
But I also get why they limit him in some capacity because of the degenerative quad issue, where you do have to be careful with it. Like,
Oh yeah.
at any moment, that could be the last time he steps on a floor. And I think he understands that more than anyone based on the 2 injuries he suffered, the one in 2021 with Joe Ingles and the one that he suffered against Phoenix in game 1, which were bumps. He got bumped running full speed, and he took a misstep, and it caused what happened. And you have to be careful. And I think for Kawhi, they're gonna ramp him up a little bit for back to backs, but otherwise, I don't think there's going to be any reining in of him like there was to start last year, where they brought him off the bench to start last season, and he
Yeah.
and he, and he hated it. He's been very vocal about how much he hated, uh, specifically warming up for a game and then having to sit for 25, 30 minutes of real time, and how much that affected him, not just physically but mentally with what he was used to. So I don't think you're going to see any of that type of stuff. I think he's going to be 30 minutes pretty consistently for the first little bit of the season, and then probably ramp up to playing both ends of a back to back, depending on what the back to back is. Like, if there's no travel, I think he'll play both ends of a back to back.
What, if anything, do we make of the lack of extension reporting talks? Is it more this team wants to preserve flexibility? Is it more we need to see that these guys are just going to be healthy and on the floor together for maybe half the season would be nice, or maybe in the postseason together? Does it even really matter at this point? These two have never really communicated that they would think about leaving. Just what do we make of the silence on this front?
They both have been very vocal over the last couple of weeks in extension talks that everything is fine. Their relationship with the front office is great. Like, there's nothing there. Like, when it's time to hash it out, they'll get to it. It's kind of like what they're relaying. Um, I don't think it's that crazy that they've kind of been the players and the front office have kind of taken this to the level that they have, which is there's no rush, because I don't think there is a rush. I think both sides understand the flexibility at play. I think both sides understand um, how much this season matters, and not just this season, but going into the new arena next season. I think they both entities understand how important this year is. and one misstep by either side can sour the relationship. Even though they say everything is fine, you never know until you know, you know? So, um, I don't think I don't think there's really anything to worry about. I kind of just think both sides are just waiting to see how everything plays out. And look, both guys can opt in or not opt in, but agree to an extension anytime to the end of the season.
Mhm.
So they're good. They have all the time in the world, and there's nothing that says you get to February, everything's going great, and hey, we're gonna extend you guys, or you know they opt out just to sign full length deals and get everything they can, and hey, these guys are locked up for 4 and 5 years going into the new arena, hooray! But there's a lot between now and June 30th, and it depends a lot on how the season goes. But all signs for right now point to both guys being back. They love both guys. Both guys are happy being home, and I kind of don't see that changing for the foreseeable future.
Among the many things I missed on last season was Russell Westbrook's fit with the Clippers. I thought he defended well, especially when we got to that playoff series against Phoenix. He, like you said, he added pace. He added some, like he helped them get some additional rim pressure. I'm wondering, what were your general impressions, and is there any concern or tweaks that he's going to need to make when you're looking at a team that plans to play both Kawhi and PG more often? Because a lot of last season was unfolding with he is playing without one or both of them.
Yeah, it's funny. I wasn't a big fan of the Russ fit. I thought it was rather an odd fit, so to speak, because at the time, just because like that day that PG name dropped Russell Westbrook, he did it completely unprompted in the locker room on the record, just mentioned Russ by name, which was very like I remember being in the locker room and we were like, that's like no one asked about him. Like that's kind of interesting. Well, it was funny because it happened like 4 to 5 hours after Lawrence Frank held a press conference after the trade deadline and basically outlined the types of players that they were looking for. And he outlines the type of point guard they were looking for. And the point guard did not sound like Russell Westbrook at all. So it was like a weird situation that night. But then Russ played fine. He was good for what the Clippers asked him, to do. But then, you're right. He didn't play a lot with Kawhi and PG. They only played, I think, like 230 minutes together, and then PG suffered the knee injury or the leg injury against OKC. They only played 10 games. They went 5-5. I think they lost the first 5 games actually, and then they won the next five. But I don't think we know what the fit is yet. I
Mhm.
think we know what the fit is, but there's been very little indication, even in preseason, of how it's gonna mesh together. Ty has said they're behind on offense in terms of installing everything he wants to install. They've been predominantly focused on their defensive side of things. Um, as far as Russ is concerned, I think if he supplies the pace and he's unselfish, I think it's fine. Even yesterday or on Tuesday against Denver in the preseason game, Russ was really good at finding Zoo uh, on duck-ins, especially after offensive rebounds.
Mhm.
Russ is really good at offensive rebounding, so that helps a team that um, kind of struggles at time for possessions. Um, but with Russ, I think if they can rein in his desire to take jumpers and get him more focused on just attacking the basket, I think everything's fine. The defense comes and goes, but that's a veteran thing for a lot of guys where veterans don't always lock in defensively as much as they probably should. But as you mentioned in the Phoenix series, he was incredible defensively. Um, he shot horribly in game one of that series, but his defense arguably won them that game. So if he focuses defensively on the little things, I think it works. There are spacing issues, but maybe they feel that with Kawhi and PG, spacing doesn't matter as much because they're that good. But that's only time will tell.
Terance Mann was probably another guy who, for a good chunk of the season, should have been playing more. It sounds like they're going to lean on him a lot more this year. He's also been reportedly a sticking point in James Harden trade talks, which is speak to how much he means. Is there something specific he unlocks with this team, or is it more about the gap filling, the ball handling, the cutting, even the hope of his shooting, even some of the undersized screening that he's able to do?
Everything.
Yeah, okay.
I would just classify it as literally everything. Um, he more than anyone else has probably been the perfect role guy alongside Kawhi and PG because he fits into everything they try to do. If they want to run small pick and rolls, he excels at it as the screener and the short roll decision maker. He himself, Terance called himself one of the best in the league at it, and I don't think that's too crazy. He's very good in that position. He's very good as a catch and shoot 3-point guy. 38% 3-point shooter for his career. Last year he was almost 39. You look at him alongside the two stars, he does everything that I'm not gonna say that they won't do, but you don't really ask stars to do. Like
Mhm.
he excels at slot cuts. He excels as a screener. He excels crashing the glass. Very good one-on-one point of attack defender. Good as a rebounder to where it's not just on the stars to do it. He does everything they ask of him, and he should have played a lot more than he did last season. Ty's admitted as much that he failed by not playing Terance more. The team wants Terance to play more. Obviously, as you mentioned, he's been a no-go in James Harden trade negotiations, and I'd heard that even back in June that he's off the table. It was just something that they were just not going to entertain. He's still extension eligible for about another week, I believe. I
Which is
think
hysterical just because this is the first year that his other extension kicks in. I just find that funny.
yeah, it's really weird when you think about it. But like, he's got 2 years left, and they could extend him for I think like 356 or something like that. So, look, I asked Terance point blank on the record at media day if he'd be interested in an extension, and he said, like, or if his representatives and the Clippers have held talks, he says not that he knows of. Then I asked him, you know, would you be open to staying? He said point blank of, I've been here for 5 years, or I've been here for my entire career. Of course, I would be open to staying. Like he wants to stay. He likes LA. He likes the organization. He likes the team. He likes the teammates. It's up to the team to use him in a better capacity, and maybe he turns down an extension and plays it out to see what he can get. But he is going to be 27, and or actually he's 27 today. As we're recording this, he just turned 27.
Happy
So
birthday, T-Man.
yeah, so you know, I think people think he's younger than he is, but he is 27, and he'll be going on 29 by the time this current deal ends. So the clock is ticking for both him and the team, but he is the perfect role guy, the perfect glue guy for that duo and that lineup. So I get why they won't include him. I understand for people it might seem a little crazy, but you also have to look at it as like an asset point of view, which is if they trade Terance, that's it. They have nothing left that they can trade. Like they'll have given up all their picks, they'll have given
Yep.
up Terance. That's it. They don't have anything else. And I think he represents the last bastion of trade equity for the team, but also on court value that they can both kind of maximize on the floor and off if they need to.
I know he's older than people think, but I think with his extension, he could technically be on the books for 5 and $78
Yeah.
million. That is a fucking fantastically team-friendly deal
Yeah.
if he signs that, I would say.
Yeah. Considering he would also be like to 32 years old, it would actually be
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
And I think it's a no-brainer for the Clippers to offer him that extension. I'm uncertain. I have no idea if he would actually accept that actual extension, just because, like, in the marketplace, that is so far below his actual value that, like, it's not disrespectful to him, but it is like you look at what he does and you're like, there's going to be guys this coming off season who make that who are not as good.
Yeah, for sure. I have some other rotation questions, but looking specifically at these 3, where it feels Terance Mann, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, how do you wanna see them flesh out the lineups around them? We know how they might start. Will be a lot of there will be one big on the court, Plumlee or Zubac with them at all times. Do you see it be maybe more of a combo big where Robert Covington is in there? I'm just how do you think they can optimize though? Like, what is the best lineup, combination for those 3?
So they experimented with long ball last year, and in the conversations with them, they believe the reason it didn't go so well was quite simply just because Kawhi and PG were hurt. And Ty's told me that, when those two are healthy, it makes their lives easier, but when they go smaller, it's not as much of a detriment. And they need those two to be healthy. And if you put Terrence with them, you kind of have the makings of you can go so many routes that it really does give you greater lineup flexibility. I like Rocco alongside them. I think for what he provides, which is um, backline defense, has been not a problem for them, but it doesn't hurt to have another guy who, can be a rim protector. He's got very fast hands and passing lanes. There was a play yesterday in the preseason game where he read a pass um, right in front of him that was actually it was such a fast reaction that when he moved his hand and the ball hit his hand, it's the loudest I've ever heard a ball hit a hand. That like actually didn't swat at the ball. He just put his hand there and it was so loud. And that's just how fast he is. And I think Rocco has to play more. But Zoo's going to be the guy who anchors the defense for them alongside the stars just because he is so unselfish. And with Zoo, they have maximized their value with him, especially around the stars.
Mhm.
Because Zoo's so malleable. He does all the little things. He screens. He's their best screener, obviously. And he's mastered or begun to master the Gortat screen in the paint, which has been a nice little thing. Um, Everyone loves playing with them. It's just they have a lot of options, but I also think that's a bad thing. I think it messed with them last
Okay.
year, and I do think a lot of options is not necessarily the best way forward. I think that they sometimes lose the forest for the trees, so to speak, where they have all these guys and they talk about their depth and like, oh, we should play this guy and this guy and this guy. Well, you can't play everybody, and if you try to play everybody, that's how stuff gets jumbled and it gets out of whack. So like a guy like Norman Powell, for instance, has to play, but where? Like, how do you play him? Because you have Bones Hyland, who you've said is your backup point guard, and you've kind of seen how he fits around the stars, at least in preseason. But like, it throws stuff out of whack. That there's a lot of uncertainty lineup wise that I think they're going to have to figure out. It's not easy to figure that out.
Among the many options that they have now is KJ Martin, which for the value, great pickup. We know what he brings in terms of athleticism, his rim pressure. What type of role do you expect him to have on this team, though? Because he can be iffy, even though he is malleable on defense.
So in Hawaii for training camp, Ty said he views him as a 3, 4, and 5. Um, I don't think he's a 3. I just think that's wishful thinking.
Yeah, he needs to
Uh,
take slash make more threes for that to even be
right.
possible.
And they're trying to get him to do that. They are dialing stuff up for him. To his credit, in the preseason game in Hawaii, he did relocate from one corner along the baseline to the other, and he made that three. It was very nice. And you're like, okay, well, at least he knows how to do that, which was a little bit of a worry coming from Houston and how they played. Like, not to
I would
sound
like to know
mean,
how many relocation threes he hit while in Houston. I'll take the under. Whatever over under you're setting, I'll
yeah,
take the under.
yeah. I mean, the way that Houston played, not to sound disrespectful to the Houston Rockets, but it wasn't exactly the most team-oriented approach to basketball. So, it's probably a little bit of a culture shock to him, which he has said has been a little bit of a culture shock to him since coming here. Um, a lot will rely on whether or not I won't say makes threes, but takes them. You just got to take them. I don't like. You don't have to make 35%, but you got to at least take take the ones that you're being given. Um,
It's
they
I
also
call it I've equated that to the Marcus Smartification, where he's had years where he hits a good amount of his threes, but, like, he takes them, and so defenses react to him in different ways than
right.
his shooting percentage would imply.
There is a respect that is given, like, oh, this guy's taking like Dylan Brooks, for instance, not a good 3-point shooter, but teams do close out on him because he
Regular
is
season
doing
anyway. Yeah, right, yeah.
yeah, yeah, because if you're willing to take them, teams will respect that and they have to come out to defend you. So he has to take threes. But I think they also just view him as a five. I think he is their small ball five. He's played there in preseason. Mason Plumlee missed the game on Tuesday, so KJ got back up 5 minutes. Um, Second preseason game in Seattle, Zoo missed, I think, all but the first like 5 or 6 minutes of the game. So KJ got backup center minutes behind Mason. They view him as a five and as a four. They like him defensively a lot. They like him in transition, obviously. Um, I will say there's been a little bit of a surprise to me, at least, when he sets screens. He is a willing passer. I think that's been like a thing that's kind of like jumped out. Um, but of all the guys in that like 4 or 5 range for them, he might be the guy who doesn't see as many minutes as he probably should because he is younger. But while he gives them more athleticism, I do think that they value spacing so much that it becomes very hard to play him and either Plumlee or Zoo together alongside a guy like Russ. Like that becomes like such a stranglehold of spacing that I'm not sure how that works.
You already mentioned that their defense took that downslide after a pretty good start last year. We know they were dealing with injuries. That's the caveat with this team on everything. What was sort of the root cause for that? Was it this lack of athleticism or point or speed at the point of attack? Was it simply just not being committed to getting back in transition enough on some of the live ball possessions? Just what were some of the biggest factors that went wrong there?
To put it bluntly, as players have said, old. They were just old. They had old players trying to defend in space at the point of attack, and it didn't go well. And I think they feel that, with KJ, if Terance plays more, even with Bones, who, while not a great defender, is still youthful and athletic enough to at least, give you good minutes there. I think they feel that their defense at the point of attack, especially, will at least be somewhat improved. Um, they just got destroyed at the point of attack last year. It put them in rotation so much that it was really bad. Like I have no other thing to say other than it was really bad. Like it got disheartening to watch at times because you could see guys who they weren't quite used to having this happen.
There were
And
there were half court possessions with them a lot of the times, like, sort of after the first, I don't know, like 15 or 20 games where it felt like their players looked like they were children lost in a supermarket searching for their parents. Like,
yeah,
that's my super technical analysis of, like, kind of what happened at points with the Clippers defense.
yeah, they it was a lot of standing around and kind of trying to figure out why it was happening rather than just making the next rotation. And that happens. Like I get it. It happens. It was just very bad, and they're working to fix it. They've been running a ton. The one thing we've been hearing about training camp is they've been running and trying to get into condition. There's been some thought that they just weren't into conditioned well enough last season, that they got worn down, especially because of injuries. But the big change that they've talked about making this year is they're going to try to stop playing as much drop and pick and roll.
Okay.
They're going to try to start coming to the level of the screen a lot more. They have felt that by playing drop so much, it got guys comfortable with not having to move their feet as much. Not center oriented, so to speak, but like just guys on the perimeter didn't have to actually, move their feet as much, and then they got beat on rotation, etc. So they're going to try to come to the level of the screen more, which Mason Plumlee, that's the defense he loves to play. I remember when his first interview with the Clippers after they got him, he said when he got asked like what type of defense he excels at, he says, "I love to play at the level of the screen. I don't like playing drop. I don't like playing drop a lot." Well, Zoo plays drop a lot, so Zoo's having to adjust to that. So I'm sorry, there's a dog
Oh,
playing.
totally fine.
um, so Zoo plays drop a lot, and he's having to get used to it. But all signs from Ty and the coaching staff point to Zoo figure getting pretty good at it and figuring it out. So we'll see. I mean, they have a lot to work on defensively, but all signs based on what they've said so far in training camp is that they're getting it. And I will say that their defense has been good in preseason. It's been pretty good, and you know, at least they can take that to the bank in preseason.
I will say I have some questions about can Zubats play that higher up that consistently, but he's always kind of had better foot speed than he's credited with. And so I'm still curious as to whether it'll work, but I think it's a lot of people view him as some plotting big, and he's not that. And so I'm very intrigued because I've not seen a lot of them in a lot of their preseason possessions. So I'm very intrigued to see how that would work out because I don't think I wouldn't guarantee it, but I don't think I think it's fully possible that he can work well in that type of a scheme.
Yeah, his hip rotation isn't the most fluid,
Mhm.
but I also don't think they're worried about that. Especially if they have like Kawhi and PG on the back line able to kind of help out, because I don't think it's a thing that they're going to worry about. Um, I do think this is good for him. I do think he's needed to play more to the level of the screen. I think the team just got way too comfortable in drop, and they ceded a lot of stuff to guards. They for years they've had problems with smaller, well not smaller, but just quicker guards have given them problems. And I think drop was their way of like trying to somewhat contain it, but they needed to go in a different direction. They needed to try a holistic approach where, look, we might give up stuff to the guards, but we need to shut down everybody else. And coming to the level of the screen is the best way to do that. So we'll see. I mean, I'm curious how it goes. I'm curious how many games it lasts. I'm curious, we could get a month into the season, they just decide to scrap it because it's not going well. But, based on their analytical stuff, they think that this is the best way forward.
They've talked more about pacing, pushing the pace, and we saw that. You already mentioned it when Russ was there. They got some more transition ops. Is this team built to play that way consistently? And are there any other aside from that, just offensive concerns? Do they have enough, higher volume out there? They have guys who can hit threes, but will they take them in enough volume? Like, what are some of the offensive tenets or concerns that you are just wondering about heading into the regular season?
Um, I do wonder if they can actually play fast. Well, they can play fast. I do wonder if they can have the mindset to just play fast more often. In conversations with Ty over the last year, he has described pace to me as more of not getting up and down the court faster, but just getting into your stuff quicker.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so they don't fully subscribe to pace as more of like all right, we're going to get 103 possessions per game here. They subscribe them more to like, all right, are we actually getting into our stuff quicker, which then allows us to yield a higher points per possession in the long run. But that's on the stars. Everything's on the stars. Kawhi and PG like, to slow it down. They like to take their time. There's nothing wrong with that. Their offense with the two on the floor has been so good over the years that you understand why they are, like that. But they do need to play a little bit quicker at times. They don't value possessions as much as they should. They are careless with the ball. Ty's talked about it for a while that they just make way too many sloppy passes and mistakes. And the one thing he can't stand is jump passes. Like if you're jumping to pass without knowing where you're going, that is the quickest way to just irritate him. And it's very easy to see on the sideline, like when that happens. Um, they Their mission this year shouldn't be to play at a very fast tempo. It should just be to play at a tempo that is conducive to not getting bogged down as often. Too many possessions over the years have gotten bogged down to the point where it's 5 seconds on the shot clock, and now you're asking Kawhi and PG to go create something out of nothing from 30 feet away, and that's not the best way. So they got to figure that out. I think they can, but they do need to start playing a little bit quicker. They hope that KJ will allow that. They hope that Russ will allow that. The one thing I will say in Russ's favor is I think attacking and secondary transition has been a lot better with him than
Mhm.
it has been with anyone else on the team. Outside of Terance, I think Terance is their best at it. But Russ allows them to take possessions off, so to speak, because they don't have to run up and down the floor as much. Russ will go do something and make or miss. At least with the possession, guys don't have to fully run up the floor. I know that sounds like weird, but it's energy you don't have to expend.
Yeah, for sure. And I really do think the point you made was salient about how it's not just pace is not just getting out in transition or even semi transition. It's just I like to look at the average offensive possession time. It was like before Russ made his debut, I think they were 25th in average offensive possession time.
Yeah,
With Russ, they were 12th, maybe 12th a little. And I mean, we're talking about the seconds are just so minor that separate 12
right.
from 25, but they matter because they kind of dictate like where are your shots or when are your shots coming in the shot clock. Um, are we able just to go through some of the non or the younger non two-way players on this roster and just get your
Yeah,
general impressions and where you think they're headed with this team?
yeah.
So let's start with Brandon Boston Jr. And I guess the big question with him is that left knee stuff serious?
Um, they're giving the inclination that it's not as serious as it could be. Um, I feel bad for him because I want to say he only played like 8 seconds. Or no, it was like 50 seconds of preseason, the first game, and then he had
Mhm.
to leave in Hawaii with the injury. Um, he's had a lost offseason. He didn't play summer league, which was a little bit surprising. Um, they wanted him to work on his player development, which he has. They're very high on him, but then you only get 50 seconds of preseason basketball. You don't know what you're going to get after that. Um, they believe the sky is the limit with him as an offensive player. Uh, there are worries for me, and this is just me talking. I do worry about his ability to get stuck in tunnel vision and not really pass the ball when he should. Um, it's been a little bit of a problem from watching games, but the talent is clearly there. They believe in it. We saw it in a game against Boston. I believe he had 27 that night. His rookie year, I believe it was. They believe in his talent. I don't think the injury is anything serious. I saw him yesterday. He was moving around fine, but it's never good when you don't play, especially in preseason. Those are lost reps. I don't know where he's going to get the reps during the season. I don't know if he goes back down to the G League for a couple weeks and just tries to get it there, but time is ticking. This is his third year. Something has to be shown.
I know very little about Kobe Brown aside from his NBA frame is viewed as just ready. Are you able to give me the lowdown on him?
Very, very good NBA frame is what I will say. Very strong guy. In summer league, he bullied people. Excuse me, especially down low, he bullied people. The shot is the biggest question mark with him. He didn't shoot well in college until his last year. I'm so sorry. But they believe in his shot. They believe in the improvement that he's had. So it'll all come down to that. They like his defense. He's got very quick hands. He's very strong. His hands are, I would actually say, he would rival Kawhi, in my opinion, for the strongest hands on the team, comparable
Ooh.
to size. Comparable to size. Um, there are times a guy will drive and he will literally grab the ball with his hand and just yank him down. It's very remarkable. Um, but it's going to come down to a shot. That's the biggest thing.
This is a player who I know a lot about, but don't necessarily know what the Clippers are, hoping to get from him or their plans for him. What do you make of Bones Hyland?
They're all in on him. They're all in on Bones. That's their backup point guard. They love him. Um, he can line it up. Everyone knows he can line it up, but he's been trying to tell people he is a point guard. He's not just a scoring guard. He is a point guard. I actually had an interesting conversation with him yesterday in the locker room before he did his media availability. Um, because I noticed he's been getting a lot better at putting defenders in jail in pick and rolls. So I wanted to ask him about us, like how have you improved? And he said it's just been the repetitions. He said he has more reps now than he did before, so he's able to work on it a lot more. but he said he's always had that natural instinct. And he said, so I asked him, I said, do you watch anybody like Chris Paul, Jalen Brunson? He said, yeah. He goes, I watch a lot of guys, and then I try to implement a little bit of, a little bit here and there to kind of figure it out. But he wants people to know he's a passer who can score. While he does struggle around the rim in his career, in preseason he's been very good on twos. I think he came into yesterday, I believe it was like 10 of 14 on twos, and he's
Holy
gotten a
shit.
lot. Yeah, he's gotten a lot better. He's gotten a lot better around the rim, especially in preseason. He's added craftier finishes. It was actually funny because yesterday, I believe it was the third 3-pointer he attempted in the game. He made it, which was the first three he's made all preseason. He was 0 of 11 before that. So he made everything inside the arc, basically, but nothing outside. They believe in his range. They believe in his passing. They believe in his scoring. For him, it'll come down to defense, toughness, and whether or not he's able to fit in around the guys around him from an unselfish standpoint, to not get too stuck in the moment trying to do too much.
We have to go here. The James Harden stuff. And I think when you mentioned that the Clippers have decided that Hyland is their backup point guard, as much as I loved the first part of the Bones experience in Denver and still believe in him as a player, I think you can kind of understand then why James Harden appeals to this team for his playmaking predominantly, and then just having that extra star body when Kawhi and PG are out. At the same time, he runs so counterintuitive to playing faster. The whole thing with Russell Westbrook in Houston didn't really end that well, and so you're just gonna get those dudes back together. I'm sure they'd be fine personally. What do you before getting into what the Clippers have been willing or not willing to give up, what do you even make of a prospective James Harden fit on this team?
Uh, it's interesting, right? Because it's not just like you plug him in and that's it. Like, he is his own ecosystem. Um, it's not like a Bradley Beal where you're able to just throw Bradley Beal in and it's fine. Um, with James, he needs the ball so much that you do wonder how much it's going to affect Kawhi and PG, and to a lesser extent Russ. It's not really going to affect guys like Zoo that much because that's not his role.
Mhm.
I'm a little concerned about the fit, but I also get it. I get it. I get that they're if their game plan is to take some of the burden off Kawhi and PG, James makes sense. But what is hard for me to come to terms with is, if your goal was to take some of the pressure off of Kawhi and PG's shoulders, and that's why you got Russ, why do you need James?
Right.
So that's the interesting question to me. And I'm not sure they have the best answer yet.
I would have I understand the theory. I would just have I would be more I would understand it more, support it more, and I'm not even sure whether I support or against it. If James Harden was viewed as a player who was not even just easy, but you can envision fitting into the larger context of a system. Last year was probably his most adaptable year, and less than 13% of his shots came as catch and shoot threes. That's a ball dominance that is so bizarre when you have Kawhi and PG are great at playing off the ball, but Kawhi and PG are also great at playing on the ball, and now you
Yeah.
have Russ. And I'm also wondering to you, and this gets into the asking price, it seems like the Clippers might be willing to give up one unprotected first and a swap in salary or something close, maybe another swap in there. The Terance Mann stuff, people are like, well, just give up Terance Mann if it gets you James Harden. I view that, yes, it's a vote of confidence in Terance Mann, but I do also think there has to be a level of skepticism within the organization. He's headed into free agency. He has not been a good postseason player. It's just a fact at this point. This has to speak to how much they actually value James Harden, to where, yes, they might be in on the sweepstakes, but the idea that they're all in or are sure that this could work, I think that they've telegraphed they're not.
Yeah. Look, if they were all in on him, it would have been done months ago. It's that simple. We wouldn't be, what is it, 6 days from the beginning of the season, and this would still be a topic of conversation. Um, when you look at it, James is an interesting guy. Obviously, everyone knows. Um, it's it's such a weird fit from an off the ball standpoint, but yet I get it on the ball Because if the
Mhm.
ball is in James's hands, Kawhi and PG can play off the ball, and then defenders have to try to leverage spacing to where they can stop James pick and rolls and keep an eye on Kawhi and PG. But like James is not a good off the ball player to the point where if Kawhi and PG have the ball, defenders don't care about James. They know he's not a catch and shoot guy, as you pointed out. And he's been going to the rim less, I believe. So like there is a worry. And then there's the he has to hit free agency. Like you can't extend him. So is he gonna resign? Is he not gonna resign? It's a big gamble. Like, yeah, if James comes to the Clippers, he's home. He's back in LA. I get it. That doesn't mean anything. I think it means more with Kawhi and PG than
Mhm.
it does for James at this point.
Even now, he's supposed to be in Philly and he's in Houston. He's not in LA. So,
Right. You know, I've always heard Houston is the LA of Texas. So,
and so when it just comes down to it, would you make the trade? If you're the Clippers, what is actually your hard line? Would you give up the max picks and swaps, but not Terance Mann? Like, what is the max that you yourself would give up to get him?
so that's the interesting part. I think the Clippers are trying to weigh whether or not the picks are worth it. I
Mhm.
think, especially because of the new CBA, and I've talked to people within the organization about it. Um, that look, if you're going to be in the second apron and you have no way below the second apron, you might as well just go all in and just blow past it. And your picks get frozen, and then I believe they get frozen the last pick in the round after a certain amount of years. So, like, maybe there's no downside to them. Maybe the pick they give up is the last pick in the draft. You never know. Um, but they are cognizant of the new CBA. The reason it's taking so long, and yes, people are going to say, well, it's because they don't want to include Terance Mann. That's partially it. But the new CBA has been the driving force behind why this is taking so long. They know now that they can only give up, I believe it's 105% of the salary to get them.
Mhm.
And their plan is to kind of wait Philadelphia out to where they're going to make it hurt Philadelphia to keep waiting and keep waiting and keep waiting. But that's also a dangerous game because they have a guy that apparently the Clippers do want. And if the Clippers didn't want them, we wouldn't hear for months and months about how
Yeah.
long down the road these talks have gone. Um, it just comes down to whether or not they believe that the risk is worth it. And if James leaves, they're left holding the bag going into free agency where, you're looking at a team that doesn't have Kawhi and PG under contract if they opt out.
Right.
So, and you're going into a new arena. That new arena is another driving force for them where they have to weigh the risk of, look, if we trade for James, he better be here for the new arena because we need fans to come into it.
And that leads me to ask, what is the level of urgency this team is operating with leading into this season? And I mean this in the sense of there's the new arena. You have Kawhi and PG are getting older. That's the other thing. So you have Russ 34, James Harden's 34, PG's 33, Kawhi's 32. Like that is your window is super finite if you make that deal. But is their interest in Harden more about this matter of opportunity, or let's throw the Harden stuff off the table? Let's say he goes somewhere else, or it's not the Clippers. Would they be prepared to put these same picks on the table for someone else, not just in an offseason, but in the middle of the year? And I know it's a hard question to answer now, but I think with them specifically, you could argue, well, they should only do it if they get off to a hot start. But then you look at the contract situations, the age of PG and Kawhi, the new arena coming up. You could also argue if they don't get off to a great start, that might be the nudge to know, like, we need to go and make this kind of splashy move.
I think they're handicapped to making a move regardless. I don't think that this roster can be just run back. Not after last season. I think so much went wrong last season, on the court, off the court, behind the scenes, that um, running it back without a move at any point during the season is not a good idea. I don't know what players out there besides James that would interest them. Um, Months ago, I wrote that Zach LaVine would be a guy that they should go after if he became available. Obviously, the price point for LaVine would be higher than for Harden. He's locked into more years. He's younger. He's been healthier. Um, I just for the Clippers, they're locked into a deal. They have to do something. But you're right. If they get off to a great start, hey, we have to maximize this while we can. If they don't get off to a great start, well, how can we turn this around? And I kind of just feel like they have to do something, but whether or not they do something is entirely contingent upon whether the price point that they're willing to give up is met by the team willing to give up something else. Like if Philly is adamant that it's okay that they don't need Terrence, okay, we'll take one pick in a swap. I think it gets done today.
Mhm.
But Maury's holding on, and that's his right. Nothing against him for that. It's just going to be a great game of chicken while we get down to the season.
People have tried to use the Ben Simmons situation as an analog, and I do think that speaks to how long Daryl Morey is willing to let things get awkward. But there's just to me something different, and I've said this too many times at this point. When Ben Simmons at the time, you were reportedly turning down offers that included Tyrese Halliburton, and right now you can't get the Clippers to include Terance Mann, and so there's just something
Yeah.
that's different about this situation. Are you ready to enter the cookie cutter portion of this podcast?
Yep. I'm
Um,
good.
are there any strengths, weaknesses, concerns, storylines about this team that are flying under the radar that we have not discussed yet?
Um, well, there's the whole Marcus Morris situation, I guess, whether or not
I was trying to
people
will
want.
him out of the rotation for Clippers fans. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, Clippers fans have been trying to will him out of the rotation for, the last 8 months. So, I think the thing that gets lost with Marcus is prior to a rib injury he suffered against the Lakers in January, he was having a pretty good season. And then the rib injury happened. He had to miss, I believe, 4 or 6 games, something like that. He came back and it was just disastrous. That situation is not great. Um, there's a lot happening. He is injured right now. I know people think that the reason he hasn't been playing is because they're trying to keep him healthy so that he doesn't, if he's in a trade, blah, blah, blah. But he actually did hurt his groin in training camp. That was a real thing that happened. Um, he did work out on the floor before Tuesday's game. Didn't play, obviously, but might play Thursday. Uh, that's just an awkward situation. Um, it's one that they need to figure out, and I think that's why the Harden thing is so enticing to the Clippers is because they can get off of him. And if they're able to get off of Marcus, with James, I kind of think they'll take that. But that's kind of the only under the radar thing happening with the Clippers. There's really nothing else. I mean, they're trying to take more threes, but they always try to do that. So we'll see.
When looking specifically at who will be the top 10 players used on this team, even if they're going to shorten the rotation or expand the rotation, does it feel like there's 9 locks when you're kind of looking at, okay, Russ, Paul George, Kawhi, Terrence Mann, Zubac, Norman Powell, Rocco, Plumlee, and Batum?
Yes. It was actually funny you mentioned this because just yesterday, uh, there was 4 or 5 of us Clippers beat writers having the conversation of who are the 9 guys. Like let's try to figure this out. And so we settled on Russ, PG, Kawhi, Terrence, Zoo, um, Norm, Nico, Mason, and then we tried to figure it out from there because I was 7. That was 8. And so we tried to find the ninth guy, and it's like, okay, some nights it could be Kenyon, some nights it's going to be Bones, um, and kind of beyond that, it's really tough. Some nights it's going to be Rocco. I think the ninth guy is very much in flux, depending on who starts at the 4 and who they're playing. There's no set in stone thing, and it's very odd.
And to that end, do you expect them to kind of shape shift their starting 5 depending on the matchup, or who would you expect to get the, like what do we expect the starting line? It feels like there's 3 locks with Kawhi, PG, and Zubats. And like, is Russ? He's apparently going to start if they view Bones as their backup. And so, like, how do you see the? I know a lot of people want Terrence Mann to start, and there's definitely a case for it. But then, if you want to maximize your playmaking or just optionality off the bench, having both him and Bones as options makes some sense. But you do have Batum still, so like, how do you expect that 5th spot on most nights to be filled?
Well, it's funny you asked because I actually asked Ty pregame yesterday. Because it was the third different starter uh, in that starting lineup for that four spot. So I asked him. I said, "Do you want to be like a by committee, or do you want an actual starter?" And he said he's thought about it in both aspects. And he mentioned that um, it's likely to be a position where they sub a guy in and then sub another guy in a couple games later, or based on opponent, which is very counterintuitive to the way that Ty's operated. But as he also said yesterday, quote, "I've evolved," is how he said it. So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, the common thought is that Terance or Rocco should get it. Nico's been a lot better with bench lineups, and he likes coming off the bench a lot more. Um, but we'll see. I mean, you get 5 games in. If it's not going the way you want, don't make a switch. Ty likes 10 to 15 game sample sizes, but in a season with so much riding on the Clippers and how they perform, if they don't come out of the gates firing, especially when you look at their first couple games, I mean, they get Portland, they get Utah, they get San Antonio, they get Orlando. They got to go 4-0. If you start 4-0, I think everything's all hunky dory and everything's kumbaya. They lose any of those games, they're going to start questioning themselves. But I think they're going to rotate guys in and out. Whether or not that works, I don't know. That's a risky proposition.
If you had to guess right now, we fast forwarding to the end of the season, what ends up being their most relied upon crunch time unit?
PG, Kawhi, Russ, Terance, and Rocco or Nico, I would say. I think they like to play small. Um, I think they just like the options that it gives them. It's nothing against Zoo. They just like the options.
Is there a weirdo, unconventional, they won't try it, but maybe they should line up that you would like to see them roll out?
Oh, that's tough. Not really, because I think they're going to throw everything out there. I think they're going to see what happens. I think I don't see the downside of them trying new things, but I don't know, like a lineup that they could kind of play around with, I guess, is like Bones, Terance, um, Rocco, Nico, KJ, Kenny Martin Jr. Maybe you get some spacing, you get a lot of cutters, and it's your youthful, more athletic lineup. Even though Nico's going into his 16th season, at least Nico operates very well as a connector. So there's that.
I think I might want to see Mann, Powell, KJ, Rocco, and Norm. Let's just, if you're really committed to pushing the pace, like let's just throw those guys out there and see. And like Rocco, we know can already play some five. And you mentioned that they view that KJ is someone who might be able to be a five proxy. And so having both those guys in the court, I have no idea what that looks defensively. I would guess that it's probably a train wreck, but I would be very interested in seeing what the offense looks like.
It would be, that would be interesting to see, especially from the standpoint of like if you turn games into run and gun type of stuff, maybe that benefits you because the less time you have to sit on idle hands, the better.
So as we record this, congratulations to the Clippers for graduating from the 44.5 win club because every team seemed to have 44.5 wins over unders. But as of October 18th, and this will go out almost immediately, I'm hoping to hold it to the 19th. So James Harden, please don't get traded to the Clippers just yet. They're at 45.5. Would you hit the over or the under on that?
That is tough. I'll say over. I'll be optimistic and say over because they did have guys miss time last year and still got to what was it 44, I believe.
Yeah.
So I'll be optimistic and say if Kawhi and PG each play 60 games, I think they get the over.
Where do you see them stacking up in the Western Conference realistically for the regular season? And maybe even the best way to do this is how many teams right now would you guarantee are going to be better, have a better record than the Clippers in the West? Because it feels like just for me, it's been Denver and Phoenix are my top two. And then everyone else to me, yeah, could I see the Timberwolves doing some fantastic stuff? Could I see the Lakers? Could I see even the Pelicans if Zion stays healthy? But everyone else to me, like aside from the Houston, San Antonio, Portland's, they're kind of just in that same tier. Would you have other teams that you'd be prepared to guarantee are better than the Clippers in the regular season?
I think Denver and Phoenix are the two teams that are pretty much locks. Outside of that, like every team has their own hiccups. Every team's got injury question marks. Every team, could have bench issues. Even Denver's bench isn't that good. Phoenix has injury question marks.
Yeah.
Um, Lakers have injury question marks. Some bench question marks. Warriors, same thing. Um, as good as the Kings were last year, they were relatively healthy. Memphis has their stuff. I kind of just think Denver and Phoenix might be the only two teams where I'm like, those are the teams that are for sure better, and the other teams just got to figure it out after them.
And you're right that they both still have question marks to where it's like Denver still only stretches 6 reliable players deep. And they had 7 last year when you include Christian Brown by the playoffs. And then Phoenix is just they killed the minimum market, but there's a reason those guys are on the minimum market to begin with. And they, the Ayton trade, I don't know. I'm not a huge believer in Nurkic, but we'll see. And I like Nas Little. Justin, is there anything else I haven't asked you about that you think needs to be discussed with regards to this team?
Uh, I kind of just think that entire team is this is like a weird thing, but I kind of think the entire team is waiting just to get to the new arena. Everything just feels like it's stuck in a limbo where everyone knows this is the last season at Staples Center or Crypto, whatever people care to call it. And they've been doing renovation at the arena, so it's a little bit changed now. Um, they just want their own space, and I think guys are just kind of yearning for that. Uh, that's kind of like the weird storyline of the season for me, is guys are just waiting to get to the new arena. Not like a bad way, like it's going to affect their play on the court, but having seen the new arena a couple times now and doing walkthroughs and stuff, it's going to be an incredible arena, and they're waiting to have their own space. So I'm kind of interested to see how that plays out.
Do you think that will factor in, not in the sense of urgency to win with Kawhi and PG, but will that factor into how they view like the James Harden trade talks from here to where it's imagine opening the arena with Harden and Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on the rosters? They're like more mystique than, oh, look, Terance Mann is still here.
Yeah, it's been explained to me that is partially a driving force. You don't want to go into a new arena with kind of, I won't say nothing to show for it, but with like less than what you left the previous one with, so to speak.
Justin, this was great. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Are you able just to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you do?
If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it this week, it is.
It's Twitter, please. Don't.
Yeah, yeah, it's always Twitter to me. So it's at Flyby9. That's FLYBYKNITE. If you want to go to my Substack, it's justinrusso.substack.com. I actually just released a story today about how KJ Martin got the number 6 jersey with the Clippers. That was not retired, so to say, for DeAndre Jordan, but was held off from use since DJ left the team, and now KJ has it. So I did some digging around, and I ended up writing about it. It's a rather interesting story, but there's a lot more to it that I didn't divulge in there, but it's a rather interesting story.
Can't recommend follow Justin. The level of detail he puts into his work, both on Twitter and his Substack. All the links, Twitter, Substack, will be in the podcast and YouTube description. Once again, thank you so much, Justin, and I will definitely be pestering you again in the future.
No worries. I'm more than welcome to do it.